Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Commissioner Beer will be right back. He said start without him. So, Leslie, welcome.
Morning, Mr.
Introduce the
Chairman.
cast and let's do this.
Yeah, we're going to start off then with the 21st century workforce. Just a little background on the format. We'll turn it over to Barb and her team for 4 or 5 minutes to give us some background. And then the panel will ask some questions. We'll let the audience ask questions if they have any, and then we'll turn it back to you for the final questions and round. And with that, we'd ask Tim to start out and introduce himself. We'll just go down the line there.
Hi everybody, I'm Tim O'Neill. I'm the Twin Cities Regional Labor Market Analyst with the Department of Employment and Economic Development.
Jean Sinnell, Health and Human Services Employment and Training Supervisor.
Carrie Ouimet, Economic Assistance Director.
Barb Dahl, Social Services Director.
Stacy Crakes, I'm the Business Development Director for the Scott County CDA.
Darren Kermis, Superintendent of Southwest Metro Intermediate School District.
Michelle Chodek, On-Site Engineering CEO and co-chair of the 50 by 30 initiative.
I'm Lori Huss, Employee Relations Director.
Jake Grusing, Scott County Library Director.
Jennifer Schultz, Office of Management and Budget.
And Leslie Vermillion, the Deputy County Administrator. With that, Barb, I'll turn it over to whoever your lead is over there.
Well, with Labor Day yesterday and the start of school today, it feels a little fitting that we're going to talk about workforce readiness today. This Scott County Delivers ties into the 21st century workforce strategy with the board goals that were established this year. And this board strategy was reaffirmed from what the board had put together several years ago, and kind of as a continuation of those thoughts and vision of what we need to do. I think there's been kind of 3 driving factors. As you can see with the lineup that we have at this table, we have a mix of 50 by 30 work group folks, along with those of us that are involved and work with the work that Scott County governs and is a part of here at the Workforce Center. And kind of those 3 factors that I think have really informed and been a topic of conversation within the workforce readiness group is, we've seen really record growth within our local jobs here within Scott County over the last several years. In addition to that, we've seen record low unemployment rates, and our demographics are changing. And that includes our baby boomers are leaving the workforce at kind of quick and accelerating rates. And so all of this leads to a labor shortage, and really one that we kind of want to put our energy around trying to figure out what to do next. So hopefully the packet that we've included today kind of focuses in on some of those areas. We have a 2-pronged approach. Again, one just looking at the workforce readiness conversation, and then also some of the pieces that are at the Workforce Center, which Carrie's going to tell you a little more about.
Sure. So as you're all aware, we operate several employment and training programs under the supervision of Jean Sinnell out of our Workforce Center. The programs serve at-risk youth, low-income adults, laid-off workers, and parents that are on public assistance. So looking back over the last several years, when we're looking just at program enrollments, we have served anywhere from 950 individuals, upwards of 1,500 individuals during the height of the recession. A lot of this also varies, of course, due to the state of the economy. The better the economy, we see our program enrollments decrease. And also it's based on funding levels. Many of our programs are pretty prescriptive in terms of how many individuals we can serve. We receive a certain dollar amount to serve those annually, so it's also dictated by that. In addition to the programs that we operate out of the Workforce Center, we also have services that are available to the public, and that is primarily through our resource room. We are open Monday through Friday from 8 until 4:15. So anybody who's a part of the public that's not either part of our programs or not is welcome to come in and use our resources to help them look for employment. We also host weekly hiring events every Thursday, so that's a big service that we offer to the public as well. In addition to that, being a resource to the employers, we are also sought after by employers for certain services and assistance with finding job seekers. Most recently, as one example, Hy-Vee contacted Jean and one of the staff who is the coordinator for the weekly hiring events and asked if they could be on site for the next 3 weeks. They're going to be doing one-to-one interviews, and they're also holding special hiring events just for Hy-Vee through November, when they anticipate their store will be opening here in Shakopee. So through the programs that we offer and the services that we offer to the public, our employment and training unit is really a key player in helping our residents find employment.
With that, we'll take any questions.
Some questions for you folks?
All right. Well, I'll start just on page 2. You had talked about the populations within the county that are not connected to the workforce, or to the workforce that's not connected. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're finding as to why and who those particular groups of population are?
Yeah, so this might be referring to, if you look at our page 10, one of the things that we looked at within the workforce readiness group is we wanted to try to connect populations to the workforce that maybe weren't as engaged as maybe we think that they should be, or maybe that we'd like them to be. And when looking at this, there's a couple different groups that came to mind, and there were the 16 to 24-year-olds. If you look, their unemployment rate is higher than what the American Community Survey 5-year estimates projects for the general population of Scott County. In addition to that, we also have the populations of color within the county have also shown a disparity. So I think if we can, that's I think some of the conversations that we've had within our workforce group is if we can try to engage and work with those groups a little bit differently, that might be an opportunity that hasn't been utilized to its fullest extent.
Barb, are those folks that want to work or seeking work and aren't working, or is it taking into consideration what else is going on in their life? Because like that 16 to 24, right? Some of those kids are in school or in college or what have you. So is that data those that are seeking jobs that aren't employed, or is...
So, and I have Tim back. Do you want to answer?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So a lot of this information is collected from the American Community Survey. It's a household survey. And the survey does, ask, are you employed, yes or no? If you are not employed, are you seeking employment? So yes, the unemployment rate is measuring those that are seeking employment opportunities and can't find them. But then there's also the labor force participation rate. And so with that, you can see of those, it includes those that are looking for work, and then also those that are they're working and are participating in the labor force. So you get a measurement of those that are not participating then too on the other side of the coin. And you see that there are lower labor force participation rates for those that are younger in age, which makes sense because they might be seeking educational opportunities or have other things that are happening within their lives that prohibit them from finding work currently or actually looking for work. But you also see lower labor force participation rates for those with disabilities, and then those with less education. So there's kind of two avenues that you can look at to the unemployment rate and that labor force participation rate for figuring out how can we get better opportunities, better pathways for folks of, all across the board.
Thank you.
If we could go back to page 10, do you have a sense of what accounts for the forecast decline in labor participation for 25 to 44 and 45 to 54? And it must be on page 9 as well. It's a related question with just the total population for that demographic, 25 to 44. Do we have a sense of why is that particular slice of our population declining?
If you're looking at, with the projections, a lot of that has to do with just the large baby boomer generation. And then the 25 to 54-year-olds right now in the future, they're going to be shifting into older population cohorts. Same with the labor force participation. Those labor force groups are going to be shifting in the older labor force cohorts. And so that's why right now it's not just in Scott County that we're seeing this. It's across Minnesota, across the United States. It's actually more severe in other parts of the world too, where we're just seeing these huge shifts in population, especially that baby boomer generation. And so that's where the projections, a lot of them are coming from the Minnesota State Demographic Center. It's an excellent resource for population statistics at the state and local levels in Minnesota. And so that's what they're going to be, that's what they're seeing in their research, in their studies, and their projections going forward. And a lot of that, again, just has to do with when you're looking at this prime working age group, the 25 to 54-year-olds, this huge shifts that we're seeing. Fortunately, Scott County does have a younger population, as you've seen in the packet, so that's one of the advantages that this county has, that it should take advantage of too. So hopefully the county then can kind of stymie this loss of population, not loss, but a shift in the population.
I have a question on page 2, and that the whole idea of having 50% of the workforce living and working in Scott County by 2030, and that in there that currently there's 50% of our citizens leaving every day to go out, to work outside of the county. So my questions are a couple of things. First of all, do you have data on what types of jobs people are leaving for? And if so, what kind of strategies or ideas are in place to try to create those jobs in Scott County? Because if we're not creating the right kinds of jobs, it doesn't necessarily solve people still leaving for what they see as the right types of jobs.
Sure. So a lot of the jobs that people are leaving for tend to be more of the professional, managerial type jobs. A lot of them are heading to Hennepin County. We don't necessarily have data on exactly what the jobs are, but we have data on the industries that people work in and the ones that are heading over the river. One of the things that relates to that really is the, and I don't recall which page it's on, but there's a reference to, on page 4, the commercial real estate market continuing to drive similar types of jobs to our county. So one of the things that we're hearing from these commercial real estate people are that these are the types of jobs that are better suited for the businesses down in our area that aren't necessarily matching up with the skill sets of our residents in the area. So providing some kind of better bridge between that industry and what the businesses are looking for and the residents that we have here is something that we're constantly talking about how we might be able to improve.
So going back to your page 11, where you're having the big shift. So as an employer, those numbers, that shift is huge in that 25 to 54, because that has traditionally been your core workforce. And so as you look at those numbers, does your strategy also focus on not just bringing business in, but helping businesses here maybe change the structure of jobs so that we can capture now different audiences in the workplace of that younger employee group and or that older group? How does that fit in with your overall strategy?
Yeah, I think that there's probably been two pieces that our group has talked about. One, we engaged the Prior Lake Savage Lakeville School District with their MinCaps program in conducting a survey of 18 to 24-year-olds this past year to try to figure out a little bit more about maybe why it is that they're not working to the extent that we'd like them to be. And with that, I think there was some insightful information, such as, a lot of their first jobs aren't actually received through some sort of technology method, but it's through a friend. And so is there some opportunities kind of based off, and that's just one example of some of the information we got from that survey, but are there some opportunities for us to make better career pathways with local high schools, with local employers? And so can we engage? We know that the diversity within our schools is changing rapidly. And so are there opportunities to engage, multitude of populations in career advancement, career shadowing, career opportunities that maybe they would otherwise not have the opportunities to do so. And so, and all of our school districts too are very interested in adding an employment piece to their programming. I think the CAPS type programming model is in Shakopee. It's in Prior Lake Savage School District. Shakopee is moving towards the academies model. So there's a linkage there and a want to try to add that. In addition to that, we've talked a little bit about trying to do a website or some sort of marketing to try to connect up individuals that aren't working with local employers here. So those are just two ideas.
And kind of along the same line there, the Labor Market Information Office, we're a fairly small office within Deed. Deed's fairly large. But one of the things that we're trying to do, especially with the Regional Analysis Unit, is just educate businesses, employers, students, and then the last one, I think the biggest one, is probably parents. With this millennial generation, which is now the largest generation in Minnesota, How do we get them interested in, for instance, in Scott County, it's those industries that really make the county unique, those industries that are growing the fastest in the county that are looking for workers. So educate them on these pathways like Barb was just saying, the opportunities that are there for them.
Barb, I know the 50 by 30 group at one point was even looking at how do we tie some of those career opportunities to rotating within employers, to tying it to school classes at those employers. Has that moved anywhere, or is that still being talked about at all?
I think we're still having conversations about what we'd like to do surrounding those pieces, but I don't think we've actually haven't put together a plan or a project or.
Project, yeah.
Right. Outside of River South, who has already taken it upon themselves to try and do some of that, haven't really taken a deeper look into how we might be able to expand that to other businesses.
Maybe I could add, I think what we're seeing within the education community is, education is so much either cyclical or a pendulum back and forth. And we were so far to one side with No Child Left Behind, an emphasis on reading, writing, arithmetic, the core subjects. That led to a couple of things. It led to a reduction in some of the electives, which included some technical offerings and other pieces. And you heard schools talking for the past decade about college ready, college ready, college ready, which is an admirable thought. It's what we're here for, what we should do. I think the dialogue that you're hearing now is a little bit more of college and career ready. Again, I think that pendulum starts to swing back a little bit and folks start to look at, it's wonderful that if the majority of our students can go to a 2 or 4 year college. I mean, that's an admirable goal and we certainly need people doing that. At the same time, for folks that, in my world, I can't get enough teachers, but I can pay them $40,000 to start after a 4-year degree and all the debt. Whereas somebody can graduate from one of our current technical programs and get a job as a welder starting in the 40s and 50s right out of high school. And so I think, and we saw that a little bit in the study that was done with the Lakeville and Prior Lake School District kids, was just talking about it's hard for me because I don't want to poo-poo or speak ill of the notion of parents saying you need to go to college, you need to push yourself, you need to do that. There also needs to be a balance to that conversation about there are other very admirable ways to live the American dream and buy a house and take care of your family that maybe don't involve having a 6-figure debt load to earn $40,000 a year coming out. So those are the conversations that we're starting to see in the schools, which is leading to a reintroduction and a little bit of emphasis on current technical programs and these CAPS type opportunities that districts like New Prague and Shakopee are kind of leading the way on.
One thing that if we would have gotten our way earlier this spring, we had put together a Youth at Work grant that was funded through DEED, and would have been an opportunity to work with some of Jean's staff within the school districts. We had contacted all of the local ALCs, worked with Southwest Metro and Shakopee School District to provide more in-depth career counseling within each of those schools, because I think what through some of those conversations we found out with the school districts is that a lot of their resources, time, they're working on trying to get kids to graduate, and they don't have time for repeated conversations with career counseling, and we found that out through the 18 to 24-year-old survey as well. And so it leaves people with kind of a limited menu of what they could potentially do when they're done. And so this grant that we had written for would have provided an opportunity to have that more in-depth conversation and to potentially connect with the kids that maybe aren't as connected, or maybe some of the kids that might be showing up in this unemployment rate. Unfortunately, it was a really competitive grant round, so try again.
Well, in our county as well, as we saw in one of the other slides about the leaking of our labor force and what kind of jobs are available here, we have to look at, are we going to work toward teaching the upcoming labor force the skills that they need to have the jobs that are currently here, or what I think Jennifer alluded to, or are we trying to attract companies to match the labor force that currently exists. So I think it's going to be on both sides that we're working toward those goals.
So Jean, on page 3, you talked about your weekly events at the Workforce Center. Do we have a measure or anything that shows some of the results or benefits of holding those? It talks about how many and who, but do we know what they produced or what the benefits were from those?
That's one of the challenges. We don't have a reporting system that says Tim came to the event and 2 weeks later Tim got a job doing LMI at D. We get feedback from the employers. We ask for feedback from them. Occasionally there are hires on the spot that we hear of. We have asked the employers to provide us feedback. We hear some success stories. But we don't have any real numeric measures to apply to it. Everybody's very excited about it, and there's a lot of demand from employers because a lot of employers are having difficulty filling their jobs. But we don't have the measures at this point.
I'll just add one thing to that, and that is that, sometimes the attendees at the hiring events are program participants, so it's much easier to track because they are working with an employment counselor one-to-one. But many of them are just residents who are maybe stopping by for the first time or may not come back, and so, we kind of rely on that employer feedback since we might not ever see them again.
Jean, how have your programs changed over the years to support the new and emerging job seeker, which is very different than the job seeker when I started 20 years ago? It's all changing. So tell us a little bit about that.
I think we have seen a dramatic increase in outcome focus, which sometimes then drives who's eligible for a program, who meets a priority of service when we have limited funds. So those things have changed. I think with the Workforce Development Board, there is more and more involvement from the private sector in looking at our programs and looking at our outcomes. A positive thing is I think our outcomes have improved because of the very positive economic climate we have in Scott County. One of the slides in here was about our meeting our self-support index, and we were only one of 8 providers in the state that exceeded the expected rate on that measure. So I think I'm seeing things much more intertwined, less that this program is isolated over here, more integration with other services and programs, more collaboration. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known who Tim was.
In high school.
Oh, Tim! You had to point that out.
Sounds like somebody else I know. So building on that in the silos, Barb, you were the first volunteer we had for Scott Delivers. You and Jean were here. One of the things you talked about was transit. I remember transportation and getting people. Have we made any progress or coordination in that area and trying to break down some silos, and where are we at today with that?
Well, I think we've seen some recent changes in offerings of transit routes to assist people. It continues to be a challenging issue, particularly for the folks in our county who are living in poverty and have children. It can be a multi-step process for that person to get a child to daycare and then to a job or to school. And those kinds of things are still difficult without a lot of fixed route transit in the area. I think we've seen initiatives, though.
Well, I know we've been talking about that last mile and things like that, and some of the businesses were even stepping up at one point, weren't they, to work on some transits? Was that more reverse commute, or have you seen some within the county itself?
I think there's been some within the county, but I think to Jean's point, I think where, especially with some of the populations that are served at the Workforce Center, I think the challenge is those family situations where you've got the daycare piece, or you're trying to make connecting routes or getting to the different employers. And some of what's happened, I think, with some of the transportation pieces, I think it'll be interesting when we get around to doing the employer survey. Part of, I think, what we want to be able to do is to look at the small employers and how they're doing. One of the things that we heard when we put together or started to put together the employer survey is we had some representation from a small employer that was there. And overall within the county, our small employers make up more of the positions within the county than our large employers do. And kind of the message that we took from this is that, that their voices don't always get heard. Because the larger employers, just have the ability, the marketing to get their jobs out there, plus the coordination from a transportation perspective. And that's all really great that they have the vehicle to make that voice for themselves. But I think one of the things we want to be cognizant of and work with the transportation group on is, have we heard the voice of the smaller employer, and are they able to get who they need, because they're equally as important to our economy here, and providing jobs for those who need them. So I think it's a good question, and one we need to drill down on further.
And I might piggyback on that, because one of the other things that this employer mentioned is the fact that the employees that they had, he used one example of an employee that was, had an hour-long commute or something to that effect, and that they actually offered to pay him during his time commuting to and from the job to try and keep him within the company. And it just got to the point where the person said, I just can't do it. And so one of the big things that the employers are saying now too is that, transportation's great if we can get people from somewhere else, but we really want to have people who are living close by working for us. So in that respect, we need housing that these people can be living at and that they can afford, in order to have people who only have to commute 15 miles or less. So that was a big piece that came out as part of that conversation as well.
That kind of brings me right back to Jennifer's earlier question of, within the strategy, the job stratification question. So it feels like a little chicken and egg. Do you bring companies in to match the skill sets of the current economy, or do you focus on what's going to be trending? Maybe it's the analytical. What's going to be trending in 10 years in the workforce, and do we try to draw those companies? How are you wrestling with that within your strategy?
It feels like to me that we're not going to be able to have one answer. I think we're going to have to look at a variety of strategies. If you look at the number that are unemployed within the county, it's like 2,500 people right now that don't have a job. So it's not many. So I think you want to try to engage as many people as you can to find a job here that would like them to be here. You want to try to find people that maybe aren't participating up to full-time that would like to be, and try to find a way to get them to be. If you can try to find today's youth that are currently in the schools that could connect to local job opportunities here, then we would want to do that. If we can look to try to figure out how to do kind of more targeted economic development to try to see if we can get people that are here to not commute and to work here, that might be a strategy to do that. So I think it's going to be probably a long list of things to try to do to make a little bit of a tweak on this.
And I think from a small business owner's perspective, there are the small businesses together employ more people than the large. And so I think it's almost up to us and the small business groups I'm in, or the CEO groups that I'm in, it's more of a shift of thinking. And why is my business in Scott County? Well, it's because I already lived here. And then I decided to build it here. And so is it part of, not something that the county needs to do or the state needs to do or anything that needs to be funded, but is it really a shift in thinking? Is it an owner of a business like me going to my next door neighbor who also owns a business and say, hey, have you thought about relocating in Scott County and therefore keep some of those professional jobs in the county, or have some of those people stop commuting and bring their business on this side. And so there's part of that too, but there isn't really an engagement. The county and the state isn't reaching out to small business owners and say, consider being closer to home, move closer to home. Did my city in Scott County come to me and say, we have these incentives if you stay here? That didn't happen. And so I think that there's some missing pieces in that. That's maybe, that's really a shift in thinking, and I think it's a responsibility of small business owners to understand the bigger picture as well. Great point.
Stacy, you mentioned River South. I still go back to, because I thought one of it, and I can't remember if it was your group or a different one, that talked about the lack of higher ed here, any connection, they leave and don't come back. And there's some pretty talented people that we lose that way. Is River South actually trying to connect some of the higher ed to some jobs and working their way around that? Have they taken some steps forward in that?
Well, so we know, I'm not sure about River South specifically. We know that there are employers that are doing that, and I will say that after going to the grand opening at Amazon, we saw and learned a little bit more about their career program and what that entails, and they are actually bringing in instructors to educate people and help them move into those on-demand or in-demand fields, which can relate to Amazon or it doesn't have to. I think River South has been focused more on just sharing of resources and the seasonality of the different positions. Whether or not there's an education component to it, I'm not quite sure.
So you have some measures, and if you go to page 14, please, Deb. And I don't know if my pagination has been different throughout. That looks maybe page 13 then. I have 14 in my package, but 13. Yep. Okay. So this is, I think, a nice key performance indicator, and it's encouraging to me to see the average wage at placement looks pretty good at $40 an hour, almost double the target. I have a couple questions on this particular slide. What accounts for that sharp increase in the wages at placement over the last 3 years? What percent of the potential population are we reaching here? So there were 35 exits to employment, and these are dislocated workers. Are we serving 100% of the dislocated workers? Are we serving 10% of the dislocated workers? Do we have a sense of that? And then the third question, and I can repeat them if you want me to. Are these county residents or people who are employed in the county, or both? But just give us a sense of who's captured here.
The eligibility for this program is what I would refer to not as a financial eligibility, but more of a situational eligibility. People need to be laid off from their job, a permanent force reduction, and need to be eligible for unemployment insurance. And no, we are not serving anywhere near the total number of people that are dislocated. We are serving the number that we can support with the allocation that we're given. And part of the reason I think we see high exit salaries is that we see people leaving jobs who had high salaries. So the goal is to be at 85% or more of the layoff wage. And I think the other thing that drives us more to the higher end of the salary scale is we have a priority of service in this program because we can't serve everyone. To serve those who have been in their occupation or their industry for 10 years or more. There have been studies that have shown that people at that level of employment have a harder time getting reemployed than maybe someone who's 2 years into their career. So those folks at 10 years, and we see more people who are 20 and 30-year employees, are typically at a higher end of a salary scale. I think I hit 2 of your questions and missed one.
Thank you. And then the last one was just who are these county residents or people who are just employed in the county or both?
They are most often county residents, but in this particular program, a dislocated worker can choose where they wish to go for service. So if they're familiar with this community, as an example, worked here, they can come here for that. We currently have a special project for folks laid off from Seagate, so we tend to see more people who worked there, were laid off from there, but didn't necessarily live in the county. So it kind of varies.
Jean, why did the number drop so dramatically from 16 to 17? I know we're not the whole way through the year yet, but.
I don't think I have a good answer for you on that one. Sometimes it's the makeup of the people that are in the program with pretty small numbers. Any other thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, we did, our allocation has gone down, so it's less people to be served overall. But yeah, I look to you guys for.
It could also be a reflection of, depending on what that enrollment mix was, that more of them during the last year were in training programs that kind of went over the state fiscal year and the reporting year. So they're still actively involved in our program and working with an employment counselor. They just haven't exited the program to employment quite yet because they're still in retraining or.
And will you remind me, for my information, is that a mandated program or this is voluntary?
Voluntary.
Okay, so
Yeah.
whether people are directed or not.
Yep.
And is that an issue for some of your programs? So as a library director, representing the library here, we think we offer some really good programs at a variety of ages, and if only people knew those programs existed, we might have higher attendance. Is that an issue in your area as well, that there may be just a lack of awareness of what opportunities are out there for people?
With the resource room and the hiring events, the things that are public facing, I think that is still an issue. I walked through the resource room last week during an event and heard a gentleman say to our staff person, I had no idea this was here. So sometimes I think that is an issue. Some programs that we administer are mandated, more in the welfare to work area. But in dislocated worker and in WIOA, I think sometimes there isn't a great knowledge of the services being there. Sometimes we just can't serve everyone. The youth programs is an example. There's been a huge legislative shift away from serving teenagers in school to serving out-of-school youth who tend to be older. And previously, we had a lot of focus on assisting the kinds of students that Darren and his school work with. And now we've needed to shift away from that in that particular program. So it kind of varies across the different programs.
I'll just add to that too, looking at the voluntary programs, like using Seagate as a project example. Seagate's an employer that's unfortunately experienced several rounds of layoffs just over the years, but more recently it became a project with the state where we have special funds to serve Seagate employees. But the initial round of this round had happened in December of layoffs. The project became a project, it was late spring, early summer. And so by that time, the individuals that were affected in December, it was, a lot of them could no longer be reached or had just kind of gone and sought their unemployment or were still looking and wasn't even aware that it was a project. So there could have been individuals that would have benefited from that. Would it have been a project earlier? And just, it's hard to get the word out in those scenarios. So.
So if you were all sitting here a year from now, what would you hope your data looked like, or what you would hope we would have accomplished?
big ideas for what can get done in a year, but that always aren't realistic. I guess, as far as the workforce readiness group is concerned, I'm hoping that we have the employer survey completed. I'm hoping that we're able to at least get a template for potentially what a website might look like to redirect people to Scott County jobs and see if we can get a prototype of that going so we can look at marketing for that. I'd hope that maybe we can have some additional connections with some of our school districts so that we can look at how to make those connections between employers and the schools, and is there a way that we can kind of set that up from an infrastructure basis so that it doesn't necessarily take a lot of manpower, but it's just more systemic in nature to try to make those connections. I don't know, from an employment and training side.
I would just add that I hope if we look at this chart based on race and ethnicity in Scott County, on page 11 next year, the unemployment rate, we won't see the disparity, at least not as great of a disparity as we do between our white population and our residents of color.
And kind of along the data theme, the Labor Market Information Office, we're constantly striving to improve our data tools. We have a lot of them. And so, for instance, one of the ones that we just created is the Career and Education Explorer. So I'll be talking to students and employers in Scott County about that tool and how it can be useful. And then we'll just be, updating the data, looking at ACS data as well. And actually, there's going to be an upgrade to the On the Map tool, where you see kind of the commuting and the labor and commute sheds. So hopefully we'll have some updated information from that and some more appropriate data from that. And I think that'll be exciting stuff to look forward to.
Michelle or Darren, thoughts?
No, go ahead.
The more connections we can make between our schools and the business community, the better. And within our world, that starts with, we can't be talking about seniors right now. We need to be talking with the middle school students and working through. And
You
part
mean
of
seniors in high school?
Seniors in high school, yeah. But within that group, within that middle school population, having the conversations about, yes, you should get all the skills so that if you choose a career path that goes to a four-year college, great. But there's another world out there, and I think that if we can just open the conversation that there are other things to consider, that will go a long ways in helping get that next group of classes of students coming through to be looking at some of the other alternatives.
I think what I would like to see in a year is that with the 50 by 30 initiative would be that each of those pillars, the education, transportation, housing, and workforce, that we really truly could speak to what the other one is doing. And I think that all the groups are working diligently to learn what the other pillars are doing and how we can collectively make an impact without recreating the wheel. And we are recreating the wheel, I think, but it's a different way of thinking, similar to that, similar to what Scale has elevated this community as far as what other people see from us. I think that this just adds to that, and I would like to see that in a year from now, we'll all be a little bit more versed in what that actually is.
Turn it over to the audience. All right, folks, questions?
I'd just like to make a comment to that point you were making about the workforce center and laid out in place. I was just going to make a comment regarding some of the statements that were made about workforce center and knowing that it's there, what they do. As a person who went through that process, I was one of the laid off employees from Seagate a year ago, or a little over a year ago. I had no idea that the workforce center existed, what services they do. The only way I found out about it was through our transition company, Lehigh Harrison, who was encouraging people, through transition to get connected with the workforce center. So anything you guys can do to continue to market yourselves in the community, especially to the laid off force, I think would be really helpful.
Thank you.
Cindy?
So one of the questions I have is, how does underemployment play into this? So we see that there's some exit strategies as far as trying to get people into the workforce, and there's an 85%, what I heard, of their current, or what their laid off salary was before they really exit the program. And so looking at that, what happens to those people who do take on employment or employment that is underneath that 85% threshold? Do they still have some type of connectivity with you, and do you work with them on trying to advance themselves into maybe an employee, some type of a job that is more tied to what their wage level was?
We follow people with follow-up services, contact with their counselors for up to a year after they exit. And for each individual, their situation is personal, and some may be able to become employed at a lower wage than where they were before. Others may not. So it's really different person to person.
Just one follow-up question with that. What is the, how many of these people come back into this program because it just isn't working out and they really can't make ends meet? Or they need additional services that the county has through some other, whether it's some type of assistance programs in order to make things tie together for them?
I don't have a number for you, but in the dislocated worker programs, we do see some people who come back in after they're laid off the next time. In the poverty programs, we see perhaps more people who couldn't make it financially and needed to come back to public assistance, and then they enter our programs because they're a recipient of public assistance.
I have a question for Mickey. You were talking earlier about business maybe needing to take a more active role, reaching out to your neighbors and saying, would you consider relocating your business here? But one of the challenges that the county faces is not having enough housing for those employees. So I'm wondering what you see as the role of business in advocating for additional life cycle housing within the county. What might that look like? How could we engage businesses in a broader conversation about those issues?
Well, that's huge. I don't know how to solve the housing issue. But I think that it is the responsibility of us to come together and to at least be aware of the housing issues. I don't even know if that's the case, that the small businesses are aware of the housing issues for their employees. I'm not certain. I think that's something that would need to be explored. And I think it has to be more of a small business kind of forum in the county, which, we do have access with Open to Business, people that have been involved in the economic gardening program. Those are some people that are already engaged in some way. Perhaps something, I don't know, I'm not sure. I'd have to think on that, but I think that that's something that could occur.
That's, Barbara, maybe I forget, what's the vacancy rate for apartments? Isn't it microscopic, isn't
Yeah,
it?
isn't it like 2%?
Well, at the time of the housing study, I want to say it was 0.9%.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And a healthy vacancy rate is 5?
4 to 5,
4 to-
yeah.
Anything else from the audience?
I do have one more thought about the housing, that's really an economic development issue and an employer issue. I think, I was on the EDA in Prior Lake from 2010 to 2016. One of the things we didn't talk about was about the economic development aspect of housing. And that was something that towards the end we started to discuss, about that being part of the economic development package, or how do we support projects that will house the employers that we have or that we hope to have. And so that was something that tying it, I think, to economic development is a key.
I would just add, tying it to economic development as a whole is key, because people tend to focus on the fact that we need housing for low-paying jobs. We don't necessarily need more low-paying jobs in our community. These are just some of the things that we hear. But as our population continues to grow, the needs for service-based businesses will grow with it. And I don't think that people make those connections that those service-based businesses that everybody wants in their community are those types of businesses that need this type of housing as well. So looking at it from an overall perspective is something that we need to do a better job of.
Anything else from the audience? Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Ms. Vermillion, and thank you for your presentation and your comments. I'll open it up to my colleagues on the board. Questions, comments, queries? Excuse me, flashback. Commissioner Brecky.
Yeah, I'm not interested in going there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to everybody. My comment, just a couple comments. First of all, thanks as always to our county staff, but especially thanks to you other stakeholders who have joined us. I think it's a great model for other Scott Delivers presentations, and it's really great to see here. I just wanted to make a special shout out to Tim. Tim, I see you everywhere in Scott County, and I really appreciate that, because I think even today during our board meeting when we talked about our tax dollars that go off other places, you were a good reminder to me that we're seeing some of them return to Scott County by your presence here. So I appreciate that, and the data that you provide, because I think this group really is able to use up-to-date data, which has to make your strategies so much more efficient. I feel like sometimes we hear data from 2013, 14, and a lot's changed. It's hard to really buy into those strategies if the data is that old. So thank you. I'll save most of my other comments for my lengthy emails that I send after this. But just the other really good news I see in here is page 13, the 3-year self-support index. Wow, we do a great job there, and this is something that I wish I'm gonna like make copies of this so I can talk to people about it to show that we really are doing a great job, and I would anticipate this is better than most counties in helping people get done using benefits and getting a good paying job. So this is a really important tool that I hope we all share with others, and I just want to applaud you, so thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Others, questions? Just a brief, a very foundational question, Leslie, and you can direct it to whoever you wish. The 50 by 30, it happened even before I came on the board, and if I remember right, the genesis of that whole thing was discussions we were having about river crossing capacity.
Yeah, the 50 by 30 actually goes back to Brad Davis, Mike Sabota, and some of the conversations with the vision coming out of the 2008 comprehensive study and what the community was looking for. Transportation was part of it. There was data on the length of our commutes, I think, which is over 42 minutes or something in Scott County, some of our average ones across the river, the capacity to be able to widen the bridge. Time with families, more time in the car is unhealthy and away from your family, and so some of those things. It then went into the land use discussion at scale, which became a unified land and economic development discussion for us, which led to the first stop shop. And so yes, it is all tied back to some discussions at TED and transportation and economic development dating back to 08, 09.
Okay. Related to the 50 by 30, I was looking through the numbers here, and it appears that we have of working age around 103,000 people. And if I'm reading the bar graphs correctly, we have about 48,000 jobs. Now, to the lay person like me, I think, well, you're not going to go around and compel half the people in the county, tell them you have to work in Scott County if you live here. But it would seem to me that an easy rule of thumb would be we should have half as many jobs as we have working age adults. Is that too simplistic, or is there another way we're slicing that? Because a little bit ago, I heard a comment that when we started this discussion, we were at 34.6, now we're at 36 point something. Stacy, you made that comment from over here, yes. So can you explain to this commissioner how the, it looks to me like we're more closer to 48%, but you're telling us it's closer to 36 or 37.
Well, so I'll do my best and then other people can chime in. So our labor force participation, we've been right around 80,000
Okay.
people. So that's the number that we've been using.
That's the number we're working with, okay.
Yeah. So roughly half of that is what we were hoping to have for jobs in Scott County, which we currently have enough jobs in Scott County to employ 50% of our labor force, but that would mean that 100% of our jobs would be filled by Scott County residents, which isn't realistic either. So as we move forward, the goal is to try and help to do a better job balancing that. And as our labor force continues to grow, obviously our jobs need to continue to grow to keep that opportunity there. But I guess I'm not sure.
Okay, well, the quick and dirty math that I'm doing is
Yep.
80,000, we got 40, how many jobs do we have in the county? 48,000?
49.
49? So to me, the ratio is we're over
Yeah.
50% now.
We are over 50%.
So we pat ourselves in the back, we've hit it. But you're telling me that that's not quite the way you're counting it.
No, because we
Okay.
still do not have 50% of our residents working within the county.
36% do.
36%, yeah.
Okay. All right. How do you accommodate for that pesky voluntary association thing that citizens like to engage in? They work where they want to work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So do we have to persuade them that they want to stay here? Is that part of our outreach then?
I think, I'll go back to something actually Commissioner Ulrich said, I think at a steering committee meeting several months ago. And it seemed like when we got 50 by 30 off the ground, we really kind of struggled with this goal, and we kind of got hung up a little bit on the language. But one of the things he said struck me was that this is really a guiding principle of how if we can get people to stay here, kind of for all the reasons Leslie said, for the health reasons, for transportation, for our local economy, it makes things better. And so if we had 68% of our local citizens living and working within the county, but 30% of them were living in poverty, we might still need to have these groups because that wouldn't feel right to us. But if we can kind of use the structure of 50 by 30 as a guiding principle towards that vision of sustained economic vitality, then I think that works. And I think watching the kind of some of the trends that are going on with the 50 by 30 goals helps us to make sure that we're kind of in alignment with that, but maybe not living and dying on that one goal, because that it can get easy to get tripped up on that.
If I could say, when you look at the logo for the 50 by 30 project, the top of the bridge is our goal, sustained economic vitality for Scott County. 50 by 30 is one of the measures that we're using to look at how we are accomplishing that goal over time. It is one of 20 measures that we are looking at. I think because it's in our name, people focus on that a lot and kind of drill in on that. But it is only one data point in an overall goal of trying to ensure that all of our residents are fully participating in the economic success of Scott County.
Hi, thank you.
I was just going to add to that, Mr. Chair.
Administrator Sheldon.
And also, part of that goal was not necessarily, as you might say, try and get folks to choose a job here, but it's the skill mismatch. When you look at our population, which is highly educated in the types of jobs they're looking for, we don't necessarily have the types of jobs that they're looking for, and that's part of why they're commuting. And so part of what they've been looking at is how do we attract some of those industries, which are actually higher skilled, higher paying jobs, how do we attract some of them to be in the county to make it possible so that if you have engineers and technical folks and medical folks is there a way for us to incent businesses to provide those types of jobs in Scott County, as opposed to you're going to have to drive to downtown Minneapolis or someplace else. And so that's a piece of how it falls into the economic development, is can we incent those businesses? So I would suggest that when we got Data Card in Emerson, here in Shakopee, those were the types of employers, and there were a number of people who were commuting to work at Data Card. When Data Card moved, they needed to move because they had to find a different location. Their location couldn't be expanded to be as big as they were getting, but that move in and of itself then allowed a number of residents in Scott County to quit having to commute. They now fall into that 2% gain that we had in terms of people. So it's not trying to get people here, it's trying to get the right types of jobs and the skill set.
Well put. Further questions, comments, colleagues?
Just one last thing.
Mr. Beard.
Leslie asked the question, what would it look like in a year? I always like those questions. And you rattle off quite a few different things. What needs to happen? And maybe these will get ferreted out in your follow-up emails, perhaps. You can forward those along. But what steps need to happen, and what do you need from us in order to do that? So that maybe the answer is another day, but that's what kind of makes my wheels spin is, okay, what does it look like? What's it going to take to get there? What do you need from us to do that?
Okay.
That is and I will also corroborate Statsman. I think there's an S underneath that over there. Statsman.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Ulrich.
I do agree with that statement of what you need going forward, but we can also look backward and say, where were we 5 years ago? What did we have in place to get us to where we are today? Because we have had phenomenal success in terms of economic development. At one time, the county didn't even really talk in terms of economic development. We didn't even have that as an initiative. So we started this, 6, 8 years ago, or something like that? And how many jobs and millions of dollars of investment in our county, it's astounding. You can't, on a percentage basis, you can't find probably anywhere in the metro area that's had the success we've had. And so I think we have a lot of things in place already that will keep achieving these results. I mean, the First Stop Shop has had phenomenal success. As an example, or the incubator, or that's not the term, what is it called?
Yeah. Economic garden.
Economic garden, yeah, that you went through. That's another tool. We've gotten a lot of good tools in place.
Mr. Sheldon.
I wanted to follow up on a comment that Carrie made in response to that. What would you like to see a year from now? And you commented on you'd like to see the employment numbers, unemployment numbers for minorities go down. They actually make up a very small portion of our workforce, but their unemployment rate is significantly higher. Do we have a good understanding of why their rate is higher?
No, I don't think we do. I think that potentially through some of the community engagement pieces that'll be done through 50 by 30, there might be an opportunity to drill down on that a little bit further as we look at those populations plus others. But yeah, I think, and as far as to answer the question on what else is needed, I think we're probably going to be going through an exploration process within the workforce group right now, and I'm putting together our action item list and then looking at how are we going to get that done. Is there a possibility to utilize or look at existing resources a little bit differently? And if there's not, then what are we going to do about that? Do we care enough that we really need to attach a strategy to potentially an action item that might move or change the trajectory? And if so, how are we going to do that? So I think we have to try to figure out our next steps and try to put together the action piece for that, and then potentially follow back up with all of you on what that might look like. So.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add, continuing to pursue grant opportunities if able, like the Youth at Work grant through DEED, that will allow us more flexibility and openness in terms of the populations that we serve and our ability to recruit and kind of target, certain areas of need. Right now, like we indicated in our materials, a lot of our programs are very prescriptive. The eligibility, there's lots of different steps to eligibility, and if you don't fit into every single bucket, unfortunately, we can't enroll you in a program. So having opportunities that allow us more flexibility, able to serve more people is just really what we need.
Well, thank you for the presentation and for responding to our questions and thoughts, for the time and energy you've dedicated to bringing this process this far. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That brings us, I believe, to the matter of adjournment. Members, before we do, just remember that Thursday evening we have a get-together. And if you have some time on Friday, come on up to Stonebrook, at least for lunch, if you're not going to play golf. The chair will entertain a motion. That one, yes. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion prevails. We are adjourned.
Underneath. But thank you.
Thanks.